The smell of jet fuel still clung to my uniform when I saw the first orange stake driven into my grandfather's pasture. It was supposed to be the welcome home drive, the one you dream about when you're halfway across the world. Rolling hills, cattle grazing under the morning sun, that old oak tree by the front gate waving like an old friend. Instead, the ranch looked like a crime scene dressed for a real estate auction. Neon surveyor flags fluttered in the wind like warning signs I couldn't read fast enough. I eased my truck to a stop at the top of the gravel drive. The tires crunched over something that shouldn't have been there. Fresh spray paint. Bright circles and lines cutting across the road, marking it like a target. Two men I'd never seen before stood near the fence line, clipboards in hand, talking loud enough to pretend they didn't notice me. They wore matching reflective vests, the kind contractors use when they're about to rip something valuable out of the earth. "Morning," I said, stepping out, the weight of 18 months overseas still heavy on my shoulders. My voice startled them. Maybe it was the uniform, maybe it was the look on my face. One of them cleared his throat and pointed toward the distant tree line. "Boundary check," he mumbled, like that explained everything. "Boundary of what?" I asked, but they were already backing away, muttering about schedules and approvals, avoiding eye contact. They knew. The Thornfield Ranch had been ours since 1892. 3 generations of blood and calloused hands sunk into this soil. My grandfather used to say you don't really own land until it knows your sweat. His sweat was buried here along with my father's and, God help me, some of mine. This wasn't property. It was family. It was memory. I drove forward slowly, heart hammering in my chest. That's when I saw it. Chain-link fencing wrapped around the family cemetery like barbed wire around a prisoner. My grandfather's fresh headstone stood behind cold steel, guarded by a padlock. For a moment, the air left my lungs. My legs felt like I was back on patrol, wading through rubble after a mortar hit. The world had that same ringing silence, where even birds won't make a sound. The gate to the house was blocked by a white SUV I didn't recognize, gleaming, expensive, out of place against the mud-spattered fences and weather barns. A woman leaned against it, arms crossed like she'd been waiting for me. "Staff Sergeant Thornfield?" she asked, not bothering to hide the smirk. Her voice was sharp, the kind that cuts you before you realize you've been sliced. "Who's asking?" "Vivian Ashworth, president of the Willowmere Homeowners Association." She said it like a title of royalty, like I should salute. "You're trespassing." I blinked. "On my own ranch?" "Former ranch," she corrected, pulling a manila folder from under her arm. She flipped it open, flashing forged paperwork like it was a badge of honor. "Tax delinquency. Emergency sale. It's all been processed. Clean and legal." The heat rose behind my eyes, but my training kept me still. Soldiers learn early that anger's a weapon best kept sheathed until you need it. "You fenced off our cemetery," I said quietly. "Community safety regulations," she replied with a shrug. "Can't have random people wandering through private property. You understand." No, I didn't understand. Not one damn bit. But standing there in my dusty boots and wrinkled uniform, I saw something in her posture, confidence born of thinking she'd already won. She thought I'd roll over. A veteran fresh from deployment, broke and exhausted. An easy mark. The sun dipped behind a cloud, throwing her shadow long across my grandfather's rose garden. The petals had been trampled under surveyor boots. I crouched and ran my fingers through the crushed flowers. They still smelled sweet, like childhood summers when Grandpa would whistle under the same tree, now marked for demolition. Vivian slid her sunglasses into place and gave me a smile that could curdle milk. "I'd suggest moving along, Sergeant. Military housing stipends don't stretch far when you've got no land left to defend." I stood slowly, brushing dirt from my knees. She didn't flinch, but she should have. Because right there, with the sound of chain link rattling in the wind, I made myself a promise. She'd stolen my family's ground, but this ground knew my name, and it wasn't going to let her keep it. At sunrise, I drove into town to find an attorney. By noon, I'd learned that every door worth knocking on was closed. The county's best property lawyer was out of state indefinitely. His partner, conveniently, was Vivian Ashworth's golf buddy. The rest didn't even bother to hide their excuses. Conflict of interest. Too busy. This case is too messy. Messy. That's what they called 3 generations of sweat fenced off and sold to strangers. By the second day, the courthouse clerk told me she couldn't locate the original tax records, the same records I'd watched Grandpa organize every spring like Holy Scripture. My bank swore they'd never receive the automated payments I'd set up years ago. And every office I walked into wore the same look. You're a soldier, not a landowner. Go back where you belong. That evening, I parked at the edge of the property, headlights off, watching silhouettes move across my own pasture. Survey crews were planting stakes through the rose garden, measuring out my life with tape reels and cold efficiency. When I stepped out of the truck, someone shouted that I was violating a restraining order. I didn't even know one had been filed. The deputy who arrived wouldn't meet my eyes. "Orders from the judge," he muttered, handing me paperwork that painted me as some kind of armed lunatic threatening innocent homeowners. The ink was barely dry. Vivian hadn't wasted a second building her story. It spread faster than prairie fire. By morning, the neighborhood app was full of warnings about an unstable veteran. At the diner, conversations went quiet when I walked in. At the hardware store, the owner, who let me buy feed on credit since high school, asked me, politely, not to come back. Isolation is a familiar battlefield. Overseas, it's miles of forest between you and your unit. Back home, it's the way friends stop returning calls. But you learn to fight with what you have. And what I had was patience, a soldier's best weapon. Grandpa used to say, paperwork is where liars hang themselves. If Vivian forged something, I'd find it. I emptied my savings, all $247, into my truck's gas tank and drove 3 hours to the state archives. The basement smelled of dust and forgotten promises, but it held more truth than any courtroom. I spent the whole day digging through brittle folders and microfilm, fingers black with ink, stomach growling. That's where I found it. A paper trail older than Vivian Ashworth, older than me. Every tax payment logged, every receipt stamped. The delinquency she swore existed, a phantom created by moving decimal points and clerical errors that were too convenient to be accidents. And buried deeper, a document Grandpa must have known would matter someday. A deed no one in Willowmere had bothered to read in 60 years. It wasn't the full answer yet, just a hint. A whisper from the past that said, "You're not beaten, boy." Not yet. When I got home, headlights swept across my driveway. A white SUV idled by the gate. Vivian leaned out the window, lips painted sharp as a warning flare. "Late-night research, Sergeant," she called, voice syrupy with fake concern. "Careful. People might think you're obsessed." I walked right up to her door. She didn't roll the window down further, just stared at me behind tinted glass, the faint reflection of my own uniform glinting in her eyes. "I'm not obsessed," I said evenly. "I'm patient." She smirked like someone holding all the cards. "Patience doesn't pay property taxes." Then she drove off, tires hissing over the gravel like a snake slipping into tall grass. I watched her taillights disappear into the dark, and for the first time since coming home, I felt something stronger than anger. Not fear, not even hate. Resolve. Because I knew what she didn't. When you're trained to fight wars, you don't waste ammunition on warning shots. You gather intel. You wait. And when the moment comes, you don't miss. The wind rattled the chain-link fence around Grandpa's grave. A promise whispered through the cold steel. This fight wasn't just about land anymore. It was about honor. And I'd win it with the same precision I brought to every battlefield overseas, one careful move at a time. The first shot wasn't fired with a gun. It came at 3 a.m. with the squeal of tires and the dull snap of wire under tension. I woke to headlights bouncing across my bedroom wall. By the time I grabbed my boots and sprinted to the fence line, whoever had cut the gate was long gone. Cattle scattered in the darkness like shadows breaking apart. The next morning, one of Grandpa's prize Angus bulls lay dead on the county highway, struck by a semi. The deputy on scene wouldn't meet my eyes. He muttered something about poor maintenance while scribbling in his notebook. Behind him, a local news van arrived before the tow truck did. By noon, the headline read, Troubled veterans' negligence endangers public safety. That was the moment something inside me shifted. I'd come home planning to fight clean, to prove the truth with paper and patience, the way Grandpa would have wanted. But watching that bull, bred from the same line my grandfather started after the war, lying broken on the asphalt while cameras panned for a better angle, that burned the last restraint out of me. Vivian Ashworth wanted to make me the villain. Fine, I'd stop playing defense. That afternoon, I called the Military Legal Aid Society. The crusty, old JAG officer on the line listened without interrupting. When I finished, he cleared his throat. "Son," he said, "this smells like fraud baked into corruption, seasoned with incompetence. Sit tight. I know someone who eats HOA boards for breakfast." Her name was Sarah Chun, a property rights attorney from 2 counties over. She didn't waste words. We met at a roadside diner, where she slid a thick folder across the table without even touching her coffee. "Most HOAs operate on sloppy paperwork," she said. "Yours never even filed their state renewal. Technically, they don't exist." I stared at her, not sure I'd heard right. "Illegal," she clarified. "Every fine, every vote, every sale they process void. Like they never happened. But that's just the appetizer." She tapped the folder. "Your grandfather was smarter than they knew." Inside were copies of property deeds, mineral rights transfers, and handwritten notes dating back to 1963. My chest tightened as I realized what I was holding: legal ownership of everything beneath the manicured streets and basements of Willowmere Estates. "Subsurface rights," Sarah said, her eyes glinting like she'd just drawn a royal flush. "You own the ground under $50 million homes. They built their kingdom on your foundation and never bothered to check who held the title." For a moment, I just sat there, staring at Grandpa's signature, the familiar loop of his old-fashioned cursive. He left me a weapon I didn't even know I had. "What does this mean?" I asked finally. "It means," she said, leaning back with the calm of someone who's been here before, "you can make them pay for every nail, every brick, every cubic foot of soil they've trespassed on. You're holding the detonator, Sergeant. The question is, do you want to press it?" I didn't answer right away. The soldier in me thought about collateral damage, the families living above my mineral rights who had no idea Vivian was robbing them too. Kids riding bikes on stolen land. Veterans just like me who bought homes in good faith. But then I remembered the chain-link fence rattling around Grandpa's grave, the forged papers waved in my face, the dead bull on the highway, and Vivian's smirk when she told me patience doesn't pay property taxes. "I won't hurt innocent people," I said slowly. "But her? I'll ruin her so completely, she won't even have a shadow left to stand in." Sarah smiled for the first time. "Good, because she just declared war, and you're about to take her battlefield away." When I drove back to the ranch that night, the wind carried the sound of the chain link again. But it didn't feel like a warning anymore. It felt like applause. The first strike wasn't loud. It was quiet, like a rifle bolt sliding into place. Sarah filed the motion to challenge the HOA's legal authority at 8 a.m. sharp. By noon, Vivian's $800 an hour attorney was already on the phone, his voice trembling with forced calm as he threatened consequences if I didn't withdraw. I told him to put it in writing, then hung up before he could. That evening, we held our first Know Your Rights meeting at the county library. I expected a few curious neighbors. Instead, 22 homeowners crowded the room, faces drawn tight with anger and exhaustion. Margaret Clearwater, a retired teacher with eyes like steel under soft curls, spoke first. "Vivian fined me $200 for having Christmas lights up on January 3rd, she said. And now she wants to foreclose over $45 in late fees. $45. Murmurs rippled through the group. Veterans, young couples, even a Navy man with a limp who said he'd been cited for mowing his lawn too evenly. They weren't just annoyed. They were scared. "This isn't just my fight," I told them. "She's robbing all of us. And I've got proof." I laid out Sarah's findings. Forged tax documents, HOA records never filed with the state, financial kickbacks to Vivian's landscaping company. Faces that had been pale with defeat began to flush with hope. But Vivian struck back fast. 2 nights later, I came home to find my well pump shattered, $12,000 in repairs. Anonymous reports hit the county claiming my cattle operation was polluting the lake. Health inspectors swarmed my land with clipboards, snapping photos like they were on safari. Then came the smear campaign. A fake incident at Murphy's Tavern. A man who looked just enough like me, shouting threats and throwing chairs, spread on social media with captions about an unhinged veteran. Local news ran with it. At the diner, people whispered like I was a live grenade. The worst blow came from the sheriff himself. "Orders from the judge," he muttered, handing me an expanded restraining order banning me from setting foot in Willowmere Estates. My own land, cut off by Vivian's lies. I wanted to rage, to storm her white Mercedes and drag her smugness into the daylight. But combat teaches you something civilians forget. When the enemy is panicking, don't interrupt. Let them make mistakes. And Vivian was panicking. Margaret's Bridge Club, now an intelligence network worthy of the CIA, overheard her bragging over wine about driving Thornfield out for good. They also overheard something better. She forged the tax delinquency papers herself. A full confession, drunk and sloppy, recorded on Margaret's phone. Sarah and I built our war room in Grandpa's old study, maps and files covering the table. We've got her on fraud, embezzlement, and illegal corporate status, Sarah said, pacing. But the mineral rights make it checkmate. We'll force her to negotiate or bury her in court. I looked at Grandpa's photograph on the wall, the bronze star gleaming in the frame. She fenced off his grave. I said, "This isn't just about winning. It's about making sure she can never do this to anyone else." The plan was simple. Expose everything in public. Make it impossible for Vivian to slither out behind lawyers and closed doors. The upcoming community meeting would be our battlefield. But the night before, Vivian made her boldest move yet. She cornered me in the courthouse parking lot, her Mercedes idling like a getaway car. $500,000 cash, she said through a barely cracked window. "Walk away, Sergeant. Move somewhere quiet, somewhere you won't upset people." I leaned down so my reflection filled her perfect sunglasses. "I'm not for sale." Her lips curled into something between a smile and a snarl. "Then I'll ruin you." The window rolled up and she was gone. But she didn't know I'd been recording since our first meeting. Her voice, slick with arrogance, was now evidence. When I got home, the wind chimes by Grandpa's porch were ringing hard in the night breeze. I stood there in the dark, listening. They didn't sound like morning bells anymore. They sounded like a countdown. The next evening, 50 veterans from 4 counties rolled into town on motorcycles and pickup trucks, engines rumbling like distant thunder. They weren't here for a fight. They were here as witnesses, as a reminder that some things in this country are still worth defending. Inside, Sarah spread our evidence across the table one last time. Forged documents, financial records, the mineral rights deed, and Margaret's smoking gun recording. "Tomorrow," she said, her voice calm but electric, "we end this." I nodded. For the first time since coming home, I felt something like peace. Not because the fight was over, but because I finally knew I'd win. The Willowmere Community Center had never seen anything like it. By 6 p.m., the parking lot was ringed by 50 motorcycles and trucks, American flags snapping in the wind. Combat veterans stood shoulder to shoulder at the entrance, not as muscle, but as witnesses. Inside, 200 neighbors packed the hall, their voices a low, angry hum. Vivian Ashworth arrived last, sweeping in like she owned the air. White Mercedes, designer suit, a lawyer trailing behind her, his leather briefcase clenched like a shield. She didn't look nervous. She looked certain. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, striding to the microphone as though the meeting were her coronation. "We're here to resolve a misunderstanding with Mr. Thornfield." Her voice dripped with polished authority, every syllable rehearsed. Despite his military service, which we all respect, certain matters require professional oversight. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd, the kind you hear right before a thunderstorm breaks. I stood up slowly. 30 veterans in leather jackets straightened with me, the rustle of movement loud in the tense silence. "Before you talk about oversight," I said, "let's talk about ownership." Sarah stepped forward and switched on the projector. The screen lit up with scanned deeds, crisp signatures, and county seals. "These are the mineral and subsurface rights to Willowmere Estates," I said. "Purchased by my grandfather in 1963. Every basement, every foundation here sits on land that legally belongs to the Thornfield family." A wave of shocked whispers tore through the room. One man in the back muttered, "My house," and his voice trailed off like someone watching a bridge collapse. Vivian laughed, actually laughed, the brittle sound of someone bluffing with a bad hand. "This is absurd. No court will honor. Courts already have," Sarah cut in, her tone cool and surgical. "These rights are valid. And here's what they're worth. $47 million at fair market value. You've been building your empire on someone else's ground." I turned back to the crowd. "I could evict every one of you. Tear up the land under your homes. But I won't, because my fight isn't with you. It's with her." I pointed at Vivian. "The woman who forged tax records, fenced off my grandfather's grave, and tried to destroy me with lies." Margaret Clearwater rose from the front row, holding up her phone. "Would you like to hear her admit it?" The audio filled the hall, Vivian's wine-loosened voice bragging about how easy it was to fool stupid government clerks with fake delinquencies. Her tone was casual, almost bored, describing theft like a hobby. Vivian froze. The lawyer at her side went pale, sweat beading at his temples. That's when the badge glinted under the fluorescent lights. "Vivian Ashworth," said Agent Rodriguez of the FBI, stepping forward with calm authority. "You're under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, and violations of the Service Members Civil Relief Act." The crowd erupted. Some shouted. Some cheered. Cameras flashed as deputies moved to block the exits. Vivian's perfect composure cracked, her voice pitching high and raw. "This is a setup," she shrieked. "These people are liars. I built this community. I protected your property values." "No," Margaret said quietly, her teacher's voice cutting through the chaos like a scalpel. "You stole from your neighbors and called it leadership." The click of handcuffs echoed across the hall, louder than the applause building around it. Vivian fought every step, heels scraping the tile, screaming about communists and vendettas. The veterans stood in silent salute as she passed, not for her, but for justice finally showing up in uniform. As the FBI led her out, her lawyer tried to follow. Sarah stopped him with a single sentence. "You might want to find your own counsel." The roar of motorcycles outside was deafening now, a rolling thunder of approval as the door swung open. Vivian blinked against the flashing cameras, her empire collapsing in real time. The woman who tried to crush me with lies was being shoved into the back of a federal car, wristbound, lips still moving in desperate denials. Inside, neighbors crowded around me, some in tears, some apologizing for believing her lies. I told them what mattered. This isn't over yet, but tonight, the land remembers who it belongs to. And for the first time since I come home, the chain link around Grandpa's grave didn't feel like a cage. It felt like the beginning of freedom. The morning after Vivian's arrest, the wind over Thornfield Ranch felt different. For the first time in 2 years, it didn't carry the smell of fear or diesel or trampled roses. It smelled like rain coming over the hills, clean, honest, inevitable. By spring, the chain-link fence around my grandfather's grave was gone. The soil was turned gently by neighbors who came to help. Hands that once signed petitions against me, now planting fresh rose bushes from heritage stock. Margaret Clearwater knelt beside me as we pressed the last root into place. "This ground belongs to more than one family now," she said softly. "It belongs to everyone you fought for." The courts moved fast. Vivian pled guilty on every count: wire fraud, embezzlement, forgery, violations of the Service Members Civil Relief Act. 5 years in federal prison. Her $2.1 million in stolen funds? Seized and returned. The county assessor who signed off on the fake sale lost his pension and served 2 years himself. But the victory wasn't about prison sentences. It was about restoration. All 1,500 acres of Thornfield Ranch came back under my name, free and clear. I had the legal right to force the evacuation of 50 multimillion-dollar homes, but I didn't use it. Instead, Sarah and I negotiated a deal that shocked everyone. The homeowners bought the subsurface rights back at 20% below market value, no interest, spread over 10 years. Not because I was generous, but because the innocent shouldn't pay for a tyrant's crimes. Margaret was elected HOA president in a landslide. Tom, the Navy veteran with a limp, became treasurer. They opened the books, rewrote the bylaws, and ran the board like neighbors, not petty dictators. Willowmere Estates turned from a fortress into a community almost overnight. And me? I rebuilt. Not just fences and barns, but the life I thought I'd lost. Grandpa's study, the room where Sarah and I mapped every move like a battlefield, became our planning office for something bigger, the Thornfield Veterans Foundation. With $500,000 from the restitution, we built a scholarship fund for the children of deployed service members. 5 years later, 47 students have walked across college stages wearing their parents' dog tags under their gowns. The case itself changed more than my ranch. Sarah's work with veterans spread across the state. Workshops teaching soldiers how to defend their property rights before predators like Vivian could strike. Lawmakers took notice. New reforms require HOAs to undergo independent audits and background checks. The Thornfield Doctrine, they call it now, you don't steal from those who serve. But the real victory was quieter. Last autumn, I built a small ranch house on the hill overlooking our family cemetery. Every morning, I drink coffee on the porch while the sun cuts gold lines across the pasture. The wind chimes Grandpa, hung 40 years ago, still sing over the roses, a sound that used to haunt me, now grounding me. Janet Morrison, the librarian who helped me dig through dusty archives when no one else would, became my wife. We adopted 2 children whose Marine father never made it home from Afghanistan. They chased cattle dogs through the same fields where I once swore vengeance, their laughter mixing with the distant low of Angus bulls that still carry Grandpa's bloodline. One afternoon, a phone call came from a Marine sergeant in California. His family farm was under siege by eminent domain. His voice had the same raw edge mine did 3 years ago. "Sir," he said, "I heard what you did in Willowmere. Could you help me fight these bastards?" I looked around the study at letters from veterans, framed photos of the convoy that rode in to see justice done, and Sarah's newest legal playbook spread across the table. I could almost hear Grandpa's voice in the rafters. When the fight's just boy, you don't ask if you can win. You ask how many you can bring with you. "Son," I told him, "pack your documents and get ready for war. Justice isn't finished yet." As I hung up, the evening light turned the roses crimson and gold. The wind chimes whispered through the quiet, no longer a warning, but a promise. Some battles don't end with surrender. They end with a victory, so complete it becomes a map for others to follow. And if Vivian Ashworth ever hears that sound from her prison cell, maybe she'll understand what she never could. You can steal land. You can smear a name, but you can't break a family that knows its own ground.